You're learning with 9 to 5 English. Business English for the workplace. Hi, Tim here with another 9 to 5 English lesson. In today's lesson, we're going to learn how to make and respond to suggestions. In work situations, people are continually making suggestions. It could be about something simple, like where to go for lunch. Or it could be about a complex problem, like how to increase sales. You might make a suggestion to one person or to a whole group of people in a meeting. Making a suggestion means stating one possible option, and that's why we often use a question to make a suggestion, such as, "What about?" or "Have you tried?" And with these expressions, you have to use the ing form of the verb, such as, "What about asking our manager?" But there are other expressions that just use the base form of the verb without adding ing. The expressions "why don't we" and "let's" both work in this way. For example, we might say, "Why don't we go to Spain?" Now, let's try some of these ways of making suggestions. Listen to each example, then repeat it for yourself. Ready? Let's get started.
What about looking online?
Why don't we hire more staff?
It might be a good idea to contact IT.
Perhaps we could hire a design agency.
Have you tried restarting your computer?
As you can see, questions aren't the only way to make a suggestion. Sometimes we just state a possibility using might and could, or perhaps and maybe. We can even combine these expressions, saying something like, "Perhaps we could." Using a combination like this makes the suggestion more polite or respectful. So that's making suggestions. Now, what about responding to other people's suggestions? Well, if you want to accept the suggestion, you can say it's a good idea or a great suggestion. And you might even thank the person who made the suggestion. Let's try accepting suggestions using these expressions. Remember to repeat the examples after you hear them.
That's a good idea.
Great suggestion.
Yes, that could work.
Thanks. I hadn't thought of that.
Great job! And did you notice that one way of accepting a suggestion is to say, "Yes, that could work"? That's not a strong way of accepting a suggestion. It's just a way of saying that the suggested idea is possible. Okay, but what if you want to reject a suggestion and say no? Well, one careful way to respond is to say you're not so sure about the suggestion. Or you might use the yes, but approach. That's when we say something positive, like great idea, before saying but and giving a reason for rejecting the suggestion. Let's try some practice with rejecting a suggestion. Once again, repeat the examples you hear.
I don't see how that could work.
I'm not so sure about that.
Great idea, but we need someone who's reliable.
That's a good suggestion, but I've already tried it.
Did you hear one sentence that wasn't so soft or gentle? The first example was, I don't see how that could work. That's quite a direct or strong way to tell someone you don't like their idea. Okay, so we've practiced some expressions on their own. But how does this sound in a conversation? Let's listen to a short dialogue between John and Kim. John is asking Kim for suggestions about who they can hire to update their website. Let's listen.
Who can we get to update the website?
What about looking online for a designer?
Great idea, but we need someone who's reliable.
Then perhaps we could hire a design agency?
That's pretty easy, right? After John rejects Kim's first suggestion, she makes another one. Now it's your turn to practice. We'll repeat the dialogue, but this time we're going to beep out the second speaker's words. You will have to say those parts yourself. Remember to use what about to suggest looking online for a designer. Then you'll use perhaps we could to suggest hiring a design agency.
Who can we get to update the website? Great idea, but we need someone who's reliable.
All right, that about does it for this lesson. We've learned some great ways to make, accept, and reject suggestions. We'll be back soon with some more useful English expressions. Until then, so long and happy learning. You're learning with 9 to 5 English. Business English for the workplace. Hi, Tim here with another 9 to 5 English lesson. In today's lesson, we're going to learn how to ask for details using questions. Now, it would be great if everyone always told us exactly what we need to know, but it doesn't usually happen. When we want detailed information, we need to go out and get it. And that means asking people questions. You can confirm information with simple yes/no questions, like, do you sell printers? Or, are you the manager? But I want to start by looking at questions that get different kinds of information, not just a yes or no answer. And one of the best ways to get information is with WH questions. We have 5 WH words in English: who, what, where, when and why. You might also use how, which has a W and an H, but not in that order. To make a WH question, you just start with your WH word and then use an appropriate helping verb. For example, you might ask, "When will the next podcast be available?" In that case, will is the helping verb. But you might also start with who is, or why are, or what does. How about some practice with asking some WH questions? Listen to each example, then repeat it for yourself. Ready? Let's get started.
What is the date for the product launch?
Who is going to take care of public relations?
When are these changes going to happen?
Where will the conference take place?
As we can see, WH questions are a good way of getting specific information. I mean, you can know exactly what details you want. But before you ask for specific details with WH questions, you might need to get some general information. In that case, you can ask a polite, indirect question to get started. You might say, "Could you or can you tell me more?" Or you might say, "Do you know anything about something?" Let's try asking for information using indirect questions. Remember to repeat the examples after you hear them.
Could you tell me more about this model?
Do you know anything about Devon Inc.?
Can you send me some information on your company?
Would you be able to tell me about the training session?
Nice work. Of course, when you ask someone if they can or could give you information, you're not asking about their ability to give you information. You're just saying, "Please give me some information." Okay, so I talked briefly about basic yes or no questions for confirming information. Now I want to show you a different way to confirm information, using tag questions. Tag questions are quite easy to use. You just start with a statement that you want to confirm, like, "You sell printers." Then you add the little question tag at the end. In this case, it would be, "Don't you?" And the complete question would be, "You sell printers, don't you?" Depending on the situation, you might need to change your tag to something else like, "Aren't they?" or "Isn't it?" or "Doesn't it?" Let's try some practice on using tag questions. Once again, repeat the examples after you hear them.
The event is on June 4th, isn't it?
You're going to give us some samples, aren't you?
There's more information on the website, isn't there?
The session runs for 2 hours, doesn't it?
Hopefully you noticed that if your statement is positive, then your tag question is negative. But if your statement is negative, then your tag question has to be positive. For example, you would say, "You're not going to the conference, are you?" All right, so we've practiced some different ways of asking for details. But how do these questions sound in a conversation? Let's listen to a short dialogue between Nick and Tina. Tina wants some details about a sales boot camp or training session that Nick's company is running. Let's listen.
We are running a sales boot camp next Thursday.
Really? Could you tell me where it will take place?
Sure, it'll be at the LA Convention Center.
And it's open to everyone, isn't it?
Yes, anyone is welcome to register.
Not too difficult, right? First, Tina asks indirectly about where the session will take place. Then, she uses a tag question to confirm that the session is open to everyone. Now, it's your turn to practice. We'll repeat the dialogue, but this time, we're going to beep out the second speaker's words. You have to say those parts yourself. Remember to ask about the location using, "Could you tell me?" and then confirm that it's open to everyone with a tag question. Ready? Here we go.
We are running a sales boot camp next Thursday. Sure, it'll be at the LA Convention Center. Yes, anyone is welcome to register.
All right, that's all for this lesson. We've learned some great ways to use questions to ask for detail. We'll be back soon with some more useful English expressions. Until then, so long and happy learning. You're learning with 9 to 5 English. Business English for the workplace. Hi, Tim here with another 9 to 5 English lesson. In today's lesson, we're going to learn how to talk about imagined situations or hypotheticals in English. Humans are always using their imagination. Sometimes we think about what might happen in the future. Other times, we have to imagine different situations in order to figure out what is the best decision to make today or in the future. And when we talk about ideas like this, we use particular words and structures. For example, when we introduce a hypothetical or imagined situation, there are a few expressions we can use. We often start with the words say or suppose. So, something like, "Suppose you were the boss," is understood as, "Imagine you were the boss." You can also ask a question using what if, such as, "What if you were the boss?" That word if is especially important. We'll see that word again later in this lesson. For now, let's practice these different ways of introducing hypothetical situations. Listen to each example, then repeat it for yourself. Ready? Let's get started.
What if you were manager for one day?
Say you had $1 million to spend on a new project.
Suppose you took the job in Spain.
Just imagine you still worked in Chicago.
One really important thing to notice is that we use the past tense to introduce an imagined situation. We don't say, suppose you take the job. Instead, we say, suppose you took the job. So we've looked at how to introduce a hypothetical situation in the present. But what language do we use when we discuss an imagined situation? Well, in this case, we use conditional sentences. A conditional sentence has two parts. One part uses if, and the other part uses could or would. For example, if I took the job, I would make more money. But here's the thing. We don't always say the if part. I mean, if someone asks what would happen if you took a new job, you might just say, I would make more money. Let's try talking about hypothetical situations using if and would and could. Remember to repeat the examples after you hear them.
If the stock price was lower, we could afford it.
I would probably be a lot happier in Europe.
With a company car, I could get around more easily.
For one thing, we would see a big increase in sales.
Did you notice that with can mean if I had? So with a company car means if I had a company car. Now, so far, everything we've practiced is about the present. That is, we're imagining if something were true now. But what happens when we imagine if the past was different? Well, this gets a bit trickier. First of all, instead of saying something like, if I lived in Seattle, you'd say, if I had lived in Seattle. The had done part tells us that you're imagining something about the past. So, stayed is for a present imagined situation, while had stayed is for a past imagined situation. Then, instead of would and could do something, you would say would have or could have done something. So instead of I would be happy, you can say I would have been happy. I know this sounds like a lot of extra words, but it should make sense once you try it all together. So, let's try some practice with using past hypotheticals. Once again, repeat the examples you hear.
With better pay, I would have stayed at my last job.
I could have studied law if I had done better on the LSAT.
We would have bought them out if we had had the money.
Without more help, we couldn't have met the deadline.
One other thing to notice is that you can switch the order of the sentence parts. You can start with the if statement, or you can finish with the if statement. It's really up to you. Okay, so we've practiced some ways of talking about hypothetical situations. But how does this sound in a conversation? Let's listen to a short dialogue between Wendy and Bill. They are imagining how things would have been different if they had had more money to spend on marketing. Let's listen.
We really needed a bigger marketing budget.
Right. What if we'd had another $10,000 to spend?
Yeah, then we could have run those TV ads.
And maybe sales wouldn't have dropped last month.
How did that sound? Bill asked about a past hypothetical situation, and then they both imagined what could have or would have happened. Now it's your turn to practice. We'll repeat the dialogue, but this time we're going to beep out the second speaker's words. You have to say those parts yourself. Remember to ask a question about a hypothetical extra $10,000. Then say what wouldn't have happened to sales. Ready? Here we go.
We really needed a bigger marketing budget. Yeah, then we could have run those TV ads.
All right, that's all for this lesson. We've learned some great ways to talk about hypothetical situations. We'll be back soon with some more useful English expressions. Until then, so long and happy learning.